I heard my fiancée tell her sister on the phone, "Once we're married, that $200,000 inheritance is mine." I heard Vanessa through the bathroom door at 11:38 p.m., and the water glass I'd been holding slipped from my fingers. It didn't shatter, just rolled across the hardwood floor of our bedroom, spilling water in a dark trail that looked like evidence of something I couldn't name yet. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, the kind of whisper people use when they think they're alone. "Once we're married, that inheritance is mine, Kelly. All of it. $200,000. The wedding's in 6 weeks. I just have to keep playing the part until then." My legs stopped working. I stood frozen 3 feet from our bedroom door, listening to my fiancée plot against me like I was a bank vault instead of the man she'd said yes to 4 months ago. The man she'd cried happy tears with when I proposed on the beach in Cannon Beach. The man she'd spent 2 years building a life with, or so I'd thought. But here she was, talking to her sister like I was a transaction, a payday, a target. I'd been suspicious for exactly 11 days, though I hadn't wanted to admit it to myself until this moment. Vanessa had always been interested in money, but I'd written it off as practicality. She worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep, made decent money, drove a leased Audi, wore designer clothes that she bought on sale. She was ambitious, polished, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and meal prepped on Sundays. I'd found it attractive at first, the opposite of my more chaotic, creative approach to life. I was a graphic designer, freelanced from home, kept irregular hours, lived in vintage band t-shirts and jeans. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Portland, bonded over a shared love of true crime podcasts and Thai food. She'd seemed perfect, like someone who could balance out my scattered energy with her structured calm. But 11 days ago, my father died. Suddenly. Heart attack at 63 while gardening in his backyard in Eugene. 1 minute he was planting tomatoes, the next he was gone. The grief had hit me like a freight train, left me hollow and shaking and unable to function for days. Vanessa had been supportive, or so it seemed. She'd handled the funeral arrangements, fielded calls from relatives, made sure I ate and slept and didn't completely fall apart. I'd been grateful. I'd thought I was lucky to have someone so capable during the worst week of my life. Then the lawyer called. My father's estate attorney, a woman named Diane Kowalski, 58 years practicing law in Eugene, calm voice, no-nonsense demeanor. She'd asked me to come to her office to discuss the will. I'd gone alone because Vanessa had a work conference in Seattle that week, or so she'd said. Diane had sat me down in her wood-paneled office, offered me coffee I didn't drink, and explained that my father had left me everything. The house in Eugene, his savings, his retirement accounts, his life insurance policy, total value, approximately $200,000 after taxes and debts. I'd stared at her in shock. My father and I had been close, but he'd never talked about money, never mentioned what would happen when he died. We'd spent our time together fishing, watching basketball, arguing about politics, laughing at terrible movies. Money had never been part of our relationship. Now it was the only part that remained. Diane had handed me documents, explained probate, told me it would take a few months to settle, but the money was mine, legally and completely. I'd driven back to Portland in a daze, unable to process that my father was gone, and had left me enough money to change my life. Enough to pay off my student loans, put a down payment on a house, maybe take Vanessa on the honeymoon we'd been planning to do on a budget. I'd told Vanessa that night over dinner at our apartment, the place we'd shared for 8 months in the Pearl District. I'd expected her to be sympathetic about the inheritance, maybe even reluctant to discuss it given that my father had just died. Instead, her eyes had lit up, actually lit up, like someone had flipped a switch behind them. 200,000? She'd said. Adrian, that's incredible. That's life-changing. We could buy a house, start a family, build something real. I'd nodded, too grief-stunned to notice the way she'd immediately jumped to we instead of you. The way she'd started planning our future with money that was mine before my father was even buried. But over the next few days, I'd started noticing things. Small things at first, the kind you tell yourself don't mean anything until they pile up into a pattern you can't ignore. Vanessa had started asking questions about the inheritance. Casual questions, slipped into conversation like afterthoughts. When exactly does the money come through? Is it going into your personal account? Or should we open a joint one? Have you thought about how we'll invest it? What's the lawyer's timeline for probate? At first, I'd answered vaguely, still too raw from losing my father to think clearly about finances. Then I'd noticed she was writing things down. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Actually writing down my answers in a small leather notebook she kept in her purse. I'd seen it one morning when she was getting ready for work, left the notebook open on the bathroom counter while she showered. My name was at the top of a page, followed by notes in her precise handwriting. Inheritance, $200,000, probate 3 to 4 months, personal account, Cascade Bank, no joint accounts yet, wedding September 14th. Below that, underlined twice, after marriage, community property, Oregon law. I'd stared at those words, felt something cold start to form in my chest. Then Vanessa had come out of the shower, seen me looking, and smiled. Just keeping track of wedding stuff and finances, she'd said brightly. Want to make sure we're organized for our future? I'd nodded, said nothing, but the cold feeling had stayed. That was 9 days ago. Since then, I'd started paying attention. Really paying attention. The way you do when you suspect something's wrong but can't prove it yet. Vanessa had become increasingly interested in wedding planning, specifically the timeline. She'd pushed to move the wedding up from October to September, said she didn't want to wait, said she was too excited to be my wife. She'd also started suggesting we open a joint bank account before the wedding. For shared expenses, she'd said. For our life together. But when I'd suggested we wait until after the honeymoon, she'd gotten tense, had argued that married couples should combine finances, that keeping things separate showed a lack of trust. The word trust had stuck with me, because I'd started to realize I didn't trust her anymore, or maybe I'd never really known her well enough to trust in the first place. We'd only been together for 2 years, and half of that had been during the pandemic when everyone was isolated and desperate for connection. Had I fallen in love with her, or with the idea of not being alone? Had she fallen in love with me, or with the stability I represented, the potential for a comfortable middle-class life? Now, standing outside our bedroom at 11:38 p.m., listening to her plot with her sister, I had my answer. I forced myself to move closer to the door, to keep listening even though every word felt like a knife. Kelly's voice came through faintly, tinny through Vanessa's phone speaker. But what if he doesn't put your name on the accounts after you're married? What if he keeps it separate? Vanessa laughed. Quiet, cold, nothing like the warm laugh I'd fallen for. He won't. Adrian's too nice, too trusting. He still thinks we're in love. Besides, Oregon's a community property state. The second we say I do, half of everything becomes mine automatically. Even if he tries to keep it separate, a good divorce lawyer will get me at least half. Probably more since I've been supporting him emotionally through his father's death. I can claim I sacrificed my career advancement to help him through grief. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing somewhere vital, destroying something I'd thought was real. What about the wedding? Kelly asked. You've already spent like $15,000 on deposits. Vanessa's response was immediate, practiced, like she'd thought about this extensively. That's his problem. I used his credit card for most of it. Told him it was easier to track wedding expenses that way. If things go south before the wedding, I'll just cancel everything and he's stuck with the bills. If we make it to the wedding, I'm golden. Either way, I win. There was a pause. Then Kelly again. Quieter. Do you even love him? Another pause. Longer this time. Then Vanessa spoke, and her voice had no emotion in it at all. I love the idea of financial security. I love not having to work until I'm 70. I love the idea of a house in the suburbs and a comfortable life. Adrian's nice enough, not exciting, but stable, safe, and now he's worth $200,000. So yeah, I love what he can give me. That's enough. I backed away from the door, moved on autopilot to the living room, sat down on the couch we'd picked out together at IKEA 6 months ago. My hands were shaking. My entire body was shaking like I was cold, but the apartment was warm. I'd turned the heat up earlier because Vanessa always complained about being cold. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time felt broken, elastic. Eventually I heard the bathroom door open, heard Vanessa moving around the bedroom. Then she appeared in the living room doorway, wearing the silk pajamas I'd bought her for her birthday, smiling at me like nothing was wrong. Hey babe, I didn't hear you come in. How was your night? I'd told her I was going to a friend's place to watch the Trailblazers game. I'd actually been there. Had left at halftime because I felt restless, anxious about things I couldn't name. Now I knew why. My subconscious had been trying to warn me, sending up flares I'd been too in love to see. Good, I said. My voice sounded normal, calm. How was yours? Fine. Just caught up on some work emails and talked to Kelly for a bit. She says hi. I nodded, smiled, said I was tired and going to bed. Vanessa kissed me goodnight, a light press of lips against my cheek that felt like a transaction now, currency in a game I hadn't known we were playing. I lay in bed next to her an hour later, listening to her breathe, watching the ceiling, and planning. Because the woman I'd been planning to marry, the woman I'd thought I loved, had just revealed herself to be someone else entirely. Someone willing to marry me for money. Someone who'd used my grief over my father's death as a tool to manipulate me. Someone who saw me as a paycheck, a stepping stone, a mark. I needed proof, recordings, documentation, evidence that would hold up legally. Because if Vanessa was willing to marry me for money, she was willing to divorce me for it too. And in Oregon, a community property state, she'd be entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, including my inheritance if it came through after our wedding date. I couldn't let that happen. Wouldn't let her profit from deceiving me, from using my father's death as an opportunity. At 6:30 a.m., I got up quietly, left Vanessa sleeping, and drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, ordered a black coffee I didn't want, and sat in a corner booth with my laptop. Started researching. Oregon community property law, premarital assets, inheritance protection, fraud, breach of promise. After 2 hours and 6 pages of notes, I had a plan. First, I needed to protect the inheritance, make sure it stayed separate from anything Vanessa could claim. Second, I needed proof of her intentions, recordings, texts, anything that showed she was marrying me for financial gain rather than love. Third, I needed a lawyer, Someone who specialized in family law and fraud. Someone who could help me navigate this without losing everything. I called Diane Kowalski first, the estate lawyer. She answered on the second ring. Adrian, how are you holding up? Not great, I said. I need advice. Is the inheritance protected if I get married? There was a pause. Then Diane's voice shifted, became more careful. That depends. Oregon is a community property state, but inheritance is generally considered separate property if it's kept separate. Don't commingle it with marital funds. Don't deposit it into joint accounts. Don't use it for shared expenses. Keep it completely isolated, and it should remain yours even in a divorce. But there are exceptions. If your spouse can prove they contributed to preserving or increasing the inheritance value, they might have a claim. The best protection is a prenuptial agreement. Do you have one? No. The wedding's in 6 weeks. Diane was quiet for a moment. Adrian, are you having doubts about getting married? I told her everything. The overheard phone call, Vanessa's questions about the money, the notebook with the community property research, the comments about joint accounts. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a long breath. You need a family law attorney. Today, not tomorrow. Today. I'm going to give you the name of the best one I know. Rebecca Thornton. Practices in Portland. 26 years specializing in complex divorces and prenuptial agreements. Tell her I sent you. Tell her everything you just told me. And Adrian, be very careful. If your fiancée is planning what you think she's planning, she's not going to take kindly to being discovered. I called Rebecca Thornton from the parking lot. Her assistant said she was booked solid for 3 weeks. But when I mentioned Diane Kowalski's name and said it was urgent, I was told to come in at 3 p.m. that same day. I spent the hours in between gathering evidence. I went back to our apartment while Vanessa was at work, found the leather notebook in her purse, photographed every page. There were more notes than I'd seen before. Detailed research on community property law, timelines for when the inheritance would come through, calculations of what half would be. On the last page, underlined 3 times, wedding September 14th. Money comes through approximately October to November. File for divorce, February to March. Minimal time invested for maximum return. I felt sick reading it. This was a business plan, a con, and I was the target. I photographed her phone next. She'd left it charging on the nightstand, and I knew her passcode because she'd told me months ago when we'd started living together. Said couples shouldn't have secrets. The irony was bitter. I found the text thread with Kelly, scrolled back through weeks of messages. The planning went back further than I'd thought, all the way back to 3 weeks after my father died. Kelly had texted Vanessa asking how she was holding up with Adrian's grief. Vanessa had responded, honestly exhausting, but the inheritance makes it worth it. $200K. That's like 2 years of my salary. I can deal with his crying for that kind of payout. There were more messages, discussions about wedding timelines, about how long Vanessa should stay married before filing for divorce, about whether she could claim emotional distress or sacrifice to get more than half. Kelly had even joked about Vanessa being a gold digger. Vanessa had responded with a laughing emoji. If being a gold digger means I don't have to work myself to death, then yeah, I'll take that title. I photographed everything. Every text, every calculation, every cold dissection of our relationship reduced to dollar signs. Then I put her phone back exactly where I'd found it and left. Rebecca Thornton's office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and expensive art. She was in her early 50s, dark hair going silver at the temples, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, handshake like a promise. Diane tells me you're in trouble, she said. Sit, talk. I showed her the photos, the notebook, the texts, the timeline, told her about the overheard phone call. Rebecca looked at everything with the calm focus of someone who'd seen worse. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. This is fraud, possibly criminal fraud depending on how Oregon courts want to interpret it. Your fiancé is entering into a marriage contract with the explicit intention to defraud you of assets. That's not just grounds for annulment, that's potential prosecution. Do you want to press charges? I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. I just want to protect my father's money and get away from her without losing everything. Rebecca nodded. Then here's what we do. First, we make sure the inheritance is legally protected. I'll work with Diane to set up a separate trust that cannot be touched in any divorce proceeding. Second, we gather more evidence. I need recordings if possible, more texts, anything that proves intent to defraud. Third, we decide how you want to handle this. You can confront her now and break off the engagement, but that might not stop her from suing you for wedding expenses or emotional distress. Or we can let her continue, document everything, and expose her at a moment when she has no legal recourse. The second option carries risk, but it also gives us leverage. She paused. There's also a third option. We approach her with the evidence, offer her a settlement to walk away quietly. No scandal, no legal action, just a clean break. But that would cost you money. How much? Depends on how much she thinks she can get in court. Probably $20,000 to $30,000 to make her go away quietly. I felt my jaw tighten. She doesn't deserve a penny. Then we go with option 2. We let her think she's winning, document everything, and when the time is right, we destroy her case completely. The word destroy hung in the air between us. I nodded. Option 2. Over the next 4 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I played the role of devoted fiancé, while secretly documenting every conversation, every interaction, every moment that revealed Vanessa's true intentions. I bought a voice-activated recorder, the kind private investigators use, and kept it in my pocket during every conversation. I backed up all her texts to a cloud account she didn't know about. I kept a detailed journal of every time she pressured me about joint accounts, about combining finances, about making sure the inheritance was accessible to both of us. Rebecca had set up the trust with Diane's help. My father's entire estate, all $200,000, was now in an irrevocable trust that could not be touched by anyone except me. Even if I got married and divorced, Vanessa would have no legal claim to it. But I didn't tell her that. I let her think everything was proceeding according to her plan. The wedding preparations continued. Vanessa picked out flowers, finalized the catering, sent invitations. I played along, smiled for engagement photos, pretended to be excited about our future. Inside, I was numb. The woman I'd thought I loved had never existed. She'd been a performance, a role Vanessa had played to secure financial stability. The real Vanessa was the one I heard on recordings, cold and calculating, discussing me with Kelly like I was an investment portfolio. 3 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa made her move. She sat me down one evening with a serious expression and said we needed to talk about finances. I'd been expecting this. Rebecca had warned me it was coming. "Adrian, I think we should combine our bank accounts before the wedding," Vanessa said. "It's weird to keep things separate when we're about to be married. It sends the wrong message." "What message is that?" I kept my voice neutral. "That we don't trust each other. That we're not really committed. Married couples share everything. That's what marriage means." I nodded slowly. "What about my inheritance?" "That should be joint too?" Vanessa's eyes flickered. Something hungry passed across her face, gone so quickly I almost missed it. "Well, yeah. I mean, we're going to be a family. What's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. That's how it works." I thought about the text on her phone, the calculations, the timeline, the word payout. I smiled. "You're right. Let me think about the best way to set that up. I want to make sure we do it properly." Vanessa smiled back, relieved, satisfied, like she'd just won something. "Take your time, babe. As long as it's done before the wedding. We'll need joint accounts for wedding expenses anyway. I already used your credit card for most of the deposits, remember? If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." I remembered. $15,000 in wedding expenses charged to my card without my explicit permission. Rebecca had told me that was technically fraud too. But I was building a case, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment. That night, I lay awake next to Vanessa, listening to her breathing, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her privately. I wasn't going to give her the chance to spin a story, to manipulate the situation, to turn herself into the victim. I was going to expose her publicly, in front of everyone she'd been performing for. At the wedding rehearsal dinner, 2 days before the ceremony, with all our friends and family present, Rebecca had advised against it, said it was risky, emotional, potentially volatile. But I didn't care. Vanessa had planned to humiliate me by taking my father's money and leaving. The least I could do was return the favor. The rehearsal dinner was at a nice restaurant in downtown Portland. Private room, 50 guests, Vanessa's parents, my mother, our friends, our wedding party. Vanessa wore a white dress, played the glowing bride-to-be, laughed and hugged people and thanked them for coming. I watched her perform and felt nothing. At 7:30 p.m., after dinner but before dessert, I stood up, tapped my glass with a fork. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me with those indulgent smiles people give to nervous grooms about to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here," I started, "for supporting Vanessa and me as we prepare to start our life together." I looked at Vanessa. She was smiling, expecting me to say something romantic. "Marriage is about trust," I continued, "about honesty, about two people committing to build a future based on love and respect." Everyone nodded. A few people said, "Hear, hear." Vanessa's smile widened. "So, I think it's important to be honest about why we're really here." I pulled out my phone, opened the folder of screenshots I'd prepared, projected them onto the screen we'd set up for wedding photos. The first image appeared. Vanessa's text to Kelly from 6 weeks ago. "If being a gold digger means I don't have to work myself to death, then yeah, I'll take that title." The room went silent, completely silent, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Adrian, what are you doing?" I advanced to the next screenshot. Her notebook. "Wedding September 14th. Money comes through approximately October to November. File for divorce, February to March. Minimal time invested for maximum return." Vanessa stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Stop. Stop this right now." I kept going. More texts, more calculations, the timeline she'd mapped out for marrying me, taking half my inheritance, and leaving. Every cold calculation displayed for everyone to see. "Adrian, please." Vanessa's voice was shaking now. "This is a misunderstanding. You're taking things out of context." I played an audio recording, my voice-activated recorder from 2 weeks ago. Vanessa on the phone with Kelly. "The inheritance comes through in November. I just have to stay married until then, take half, and file. Adrian's so trusting he won't see it coming until it's too late." Vanessa's mother gasped, stood up, started to say something. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I showed them everything. The research on community property law, the notes about how long to stay married for maximum financial gain, the texts about how exhausting my grief was, but worth it for the payout. The message where she'd joked about being a gold digger. By the time I was done, Vanessa was crying. Real tears, maybe, or just panic. Everyone else was staring at her like they'd never seen her before, because they hadn't. None of us had. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice was quiet but sharp as broken glass. You were going to marry my son for his money? Vanessa tried to salvage it, reached for her mother's hand. It's not like that. Adrian's making it sound worse than it is. I do love him. I just also wanted financial security. Her mother pulled away. That's exactly what it sounds like, Vanessa. You were planning to commit fraud. Vanessa turned to me, eyes desperate. Adrian, please. We can talk about this privately. We can fix this. I shook my head. There's nothing to fix. The engagement is over. The wedding is canceled. And just so everyone knows, I've already consulted with a lawyer. I turned to Rebecca Thornton, who'd been sitting quietly at a table in the back. She stood, gave a small wave. Rebecca Thornton, family law attorney, she said. I've been working with Adrian for the past month to protect his father's inheritance from exactly this kind of fraudulent scheme. Everything you've seen tonight has been documented, verified, and secured as evidence. Vanessa, if you attempt to sue Adrian for breach of promise or emotional distress or wedding expenses, I will countersue for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You will lose. Vanessa looked around the room, at her parents, her friends, her sister Kelly, who was staring at her phone like it might incriminate her too. No one was looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with disgust. She grabbed her purse, walked toward the door, stopped halfway and turned back to me. You're going to regret this. No, I said. I already regret ever meeting you. But this I'll never regret. She left. Her parents followed. Kelly slunk out behind them. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then my mother came over, hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. I'm so sorry, she said. I'm so proud of you for seeing through it, but I'm so sorry you had to. One of my friends, a guy named Kyle I'd known since college, let out a low whistle. Man, that was the most brutal thing I've ever seen. And also, completely justified. The rest of the evening dissolved into conversations about what had just happened. People wanted to know details, wanted to understand how I'd discovered the truth. I gave them the abbreviated version, found out she was after my dad's inheritance, gathered proof, decided not to let her get away with it. Rebecca approached me before she left. You did good, she said. That took courage. Now comes the fallout. What fallout? Vanessa's going to try to save face. She'll tell people you manipulated the evidence, took things out of context, that she really loved you. Prepare for that. Rebecca was right. Within 2 days, Vanessa had created a narrative on social media, posted a long, tearful statement about how I'd humiliated her publicly, how I'd taken private conversations out of context, how yes, she'd been concerned about financial stability, but that didn't mean she didn't love me, how I'd destroyed her reputation over a misunderstanding. Some people believed her, mostly people who didn't know me well, who wanted to believe in the performance she'd put on for years. But most people, especially those who'd been at the rehearsal dinner, who'd seen the evidence firsthand, knew better. Kelly tried to defend her sister, posted screenshots of conversations that she claimed proved Vanessa really loved me. But the screenshots actually made things worse. Showed more calculations, more discussions about money, more evidence of the con. Within a week, Vanessa had deleted all her social media accounts, moved back in with her parents. I heard through mutual friends that she'd lost her job. Her company had found out about the fraud scheme, decided someone willing to commit fraud in her personal life was a liability in pharmaceutical sales. She'd threatened to sue me. Rebecca had sent her a cease and desist letter within hours, attached copies of all the evidence we'd gathered, explained in detail how a lawsuit would result in criminal charges for fraud. Vanessa's lawyer, whoever he was, must have advised her to back off. I never heard from her again. The wedding expenses were another matter. I'd charged $15,000 to my credit card for deposits. Vanessa had authorized most of them, but I'd agreed to pay. Technically, I was responsible. But Rebecca helped me dispute the charges. Showed the credit card company evidence that Vanessa had entered into the wedding contract fraudulently. Most vendors refunded the deposits once they understood the situation. The ones who didn't, I ate the cost. Better to lose a few $1,000s than $100,000. The inheritance came through in November, exactly when Diane had predicted. $197,340 after final taxes and fees. It went straight into the trust Rebecca and Diane had set up. Completely protected. Completely mine. I used some of it to pay Rebecca's legal fees, which were substantial but worth every penny. Sent Diane a thank you gift, a case of wine from her favorite vineyard. Put the rest in investments and savings. My father's money, his legacy, safe and secure. I thought about him often in the months after. Wondered if he'd have been proud of how I handled it, or disappointed that I'd let myself get fooled in the first place. Probably both. He'd always told me to trust people but verify. I'd forgotten the verify part. 6 months later, I ran into Kelly at a coffee shop. She saw me, started to turn away, then stopped, walked over. She looked tired, older than 29, had any right to look. I'm sorry, she said. For what it's worth, I told Vanessa it was wrong. I told her not to do it, but she was my sister and I didn't want to lose her. You lost your sister anyway, I said. It wasn't a question. Kelly nodded. She won't talk to me anymore. Blames me for not backing her up enough after you exposed her. Says I should have lied for her, helped her spin the story. Would you have? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. She's my sister. I looked at Kelly and saw someone who'd been as trapped as me, just on the other side of the con. Vanessa had manipulated both of us, in different ways. I'm sorry you lost your sister, I said. But I'm not sorry I exposed her. Kelly nodded again. I know. You shouldn't be. She deserved it. Then she left. I never saw either of them again. Life moved on. I kept freelancing, took on bigger clients, raised my rates, bought a small house in Selwood with part of the inheritance. Nothing fancy, just a 1920s bungalow with good light and a yard for the dog I planned to get. Went to therapy to process what had happened. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Olivia Kent, 61 years of practice, gentle eyes and zero tolerance for self-pity, helped me understand that I wasn't stupid for trusting Vanessa. I was human. People are wired to trust the people they love, she said. That's not a flaw. That's what makes us capable of connection. The flaw was hers, not yours. She chose to exploit trust. You chose to protect yourself once you learned the truth. Those are very different choices. Over time, the anger faded. The hurt took longer, but it faded too. What replaced them was something sharper, clearer, a better understanding of who I was and what I deserved. I started dating again after a year, slowly, carefully, with much better boundaries. Told dates about the inheritance early, watched how they reacted. Most people were sympathetic. A few were too interested in the money. Those relationships ended quickly. I met someone eventually, a woman named Isabel, a high school teacher, kind and funny and completely unimpressed by money. She drove a beat-up Subaru, lived in a tiny apartment with too many plants, spent her weekends volunteering at an animal shelter. When I told her about Vanessa and the inheritance and what had happened, she'd listened quietly and then said, "That must have been horrible. I'm sorry you went through that. Not, I'm glad you exposed her or she deserved it. Just simple empathy." That's when I knew she was different. We took things slow. Dated for 2 years before moving in together. Another year before I proposed. This time with no doubts, no red flags, no voice in the back of my head warning me something was wrong. Just certainty that I'd found someone who loved me for who I was, not what I had. We got married on a beach in Oregon, same as I'd planned with Vanessa, but this time it meant something. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. No rehearsal dinner, no dramatic speeches, no exposures. Just two people promising to build a life together based on trust. Real trust. The kind that doesn't need to be verified because it's woven into every moment. The night before the wedding, I visited my father's grave, brought flowers, sat on the grass, told him about Isabel. "I think you'd like her," I said. "She's strong and smart, and she sees through bullshit. You would have gotten along." The wind rustled through the trees. I took it as agreement. I also told him about Vanessa, about how I'd protected his money, about how I'd learned to be more careful, but not closed off. He'd always said the world would teach me hard lessons. He'd been right, but he'd also said those lessons would make me stronger, wiser, better, right again. I left the cemetery as the sun was setting, drove back to Portland, to Isabel waiting in our house, to a life built on truth instead of performance, to a future I'd chosen instead of one someone had chosen for me. The $200,000 was still in the trust, still growing, still safe, my father's legacy. But the real inheritance he'd left me wasn't the money. It was the strength to protect it, the wisdom to see through deception, and the knowledge that real love doesn't come with a price tag or a timeline or a payout. It just comes, and when it does, it's worth more than any amount of money could ever be. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, but at least I'd learned it, and that was worth everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.